Good morning. Today we'll begin looking at the book of Judges. It's chapters 1 through 6, combining yesterday and today's readings. The book of Judges is a time of transition for the Israelite people. Moses and Joshua have been their leaders, strong leaders that God appointed, and the people under the leadership of Moses and Joshua remained faithful to God because of that leadership. And even though there was a lot of grumbling and everything and complaining, they were faithful to God in all of that. And so the book of Judges is kind of a time of growing of the Israelite nation, a time of the conquest of them and moving into the land, but it's the time of disobedience, of growing up. And it's, kind of like when our kids are infants and toddlers. I mean, they're dependent upon us. And then they get to be the teenage years, and they're starting to explore who they are and go out on their own. This time of the Judges is a time of growth, of trial and error, maybe, so to speak. And we all do that, trial and error. And part of it is that as the Israelite nations, as the tribes went out to possess their portions of the land, they didn't completely dispose of the peoples that were there. And this was disobedience then to God, that they didn't, totally drive the people out and cause problems for them. Different tribes of Israel, like the tribe of Simeon, kind of disappears in time and becomes part of Judah. I mean, we don't hear a lot more. So there's growing and change in so much of it. Chapter 1 starts with, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go and fight against us? And so then there were different people of each of the tribes that led them into their land and their areas. So chapter 1 is the conquest of the land, but it's, as I said, an incomplete conquest because they don't completely drive the peoples out. And, the different houses, like the house of Joseph went up against Bethel in verse 22. Verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of whichever. 29, and Ephraim did not drive out all the Canaanites. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out all. So none of them completely followed the instructions of God by driving all of the people out of the land that they came to possess. And then we get to verse 34. The Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill companies, didn't allow them to live on the plain. But again, it wasn't a complete conquest. And then verse 32, or chapter 2 starts out, the angel of the Lord went from Gilgal and says, I brought you from the land of Egypt, brought you out of the land. I will never break my covenant with you. If for your part, don't make covenants with other peoples and stuff, tear down altars, but you have not obeyed me. God is watching. God has been leading and guiding them, and he sees what they do, and he says, you have not obeyed my command. So now I say to you, I'm not going to drive them out. I'm not going to, they will become your adversaries, and their gods will be a snare to you. You're going to cause problems. And we find that, in in chapter 2, we still hear a mention of Joshua again. When Joshua dismissed the Israelites to their own inheritance, they went to take possession of the land. And then it says, the people worshiped the Lord all the days of Joshua. When we get to verse 11, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and worshiped the Baals. They abandoned God. And then verse 16, God raised up judges. They didn't have a king. They didn't have this leader like Moses and Joshua. They weren't, one. Until the time of like David again, they didn't, with the kings and stuff, they were growing pains. They weren't a totally unified nation. They didn't have one leader that they all followed and listened to. But they had what was referred to as judges, people that God raised up that it's verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he delivered the Israelites from the enemies. But when the judge died, the people would relapse. You know, when they had a good, strong leader, they were okay. When that leader died, it was just like they wandered around. It's just like, you know, the shepherd leading and guiding the sheep. And it's, you know, it's as God leads and guides us. And when we're faithful to God and do as God says, I mean, things just seem to go better. And God sent Jesus to be our leader as well. But you know, like verse 19, whenever the judge died, they would relapse, behave worse than their ancestors, and then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against them. And we see that over and over and over again, that, you know, the people did evil in the sight of the Lord in these first chapters. And we see so much trouble and everything that way. And then when we get more toward the end of chapter 3, God raises someone up then to lead and to regain prominence for the Israelites. And, you know, and like verse 30 of chapter 3, toward the end, though Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land rested for 80 years. So they had an 80-year time span where they listened to God, where there was peace, where they were, you know, everything was going well. And then after that person that was leading, another came Shamar, son of Amath, and he too delivered Israel. And then chapter 4 starts. The Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. I mean, I wonder how many times it would say Russell did evil in the sight of the Lord if it was talking about me or about you. And yeah, I've got a little background tapping going on this morning. Hunter's here in my shop checking things out, so that's a good thing. Anyway, the Israelites had sinned again. And so in chapter 4, we see Deborah raised up, and she's one of the great judges. And she is led by God, and she speaks to, I'm not going to think of the man's name right now, but he says, you know, she says to Barak, and, you know, I'm going to, you know, God says, go and take possession. And he says, I'm not going to go that unless you go with us. And Deborah says, so if I go with you, it's going to be said that, you know, God delivered them with the hand of a woman. You know, you're not going to get any credit. And he said, that's okay with me. I want you to go with us because, you know, this is God. So she goes with, she leads, and she's there alongside all of that. And the Israelites are successful. The Israelites prevail. And so then chapter 5 is the song of Deborah, and just the story of how she delivered the peoples and how they were successful against the other nations and tribes. And the very last thing in chapter 5, the land rested for 40 years. They had this 40-year time again of peace, of tranquility, of following God. And this is, you know, the land rested for 40 years. They were at peace with each other and with everything else. And then chapter 6, boom, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. I mean, it's just, we see this pattern repeat over and over and over again. And then verse 7, I mean, the Israelites cry out to the Lord and they say, why have you abandoned us? You know, why are these other people ruling us? And why are these other people destroying our crops? And why are these other people causing so much trouble for us? And God says, because you're not listening to me. You know, and so then in chapter 6, God raises up Gideon. And you know, and Gideon was in the field, it says, beating out wheat when the angel of the Lord came to him. And they were beating the wheat out, you know, and they needed to hide it from these Midianites who were ruling over them, because the Midianites, you know, would destroy their wheat crops. They would kill their livestock. They were oppressing the Israelites greatly. But Gideon was doing what he could to provide. And when the angel of the Lord came and spoke to him, and with, you know, and so Gideon is told by the angel of the Lord to, you know, to tear down the altar of Baal, this idol, this worship, and he does it in verse 27. He took 10 of his servants. He did as the Lord said, But because he was afraid of his family and the other people, he did it by night. He tore it down at night. And so when the townspeople got up in the morning, they're in an uproar because our church is gone. I mean, Baal, the altar, that was their church. This was where they were worshiping. And they're upset by that. And who has done this? And after searching and inquiring, it says they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did it. And the townspeople says, bring out your son so that he might die because he's pulled down the altar of Baal. And the response, let Baal take his revenge. That's, in verse 32, let Baal contend against him because he pulled down his altar. Think anything happened because of Baal? No. And then the Midianites and everybody came together. And Gideon is called to serve the Lord. And he's not sure about the call. And he says to God, if this is true, if you really want me to do that, I'm going to put this fleece out, this sheepskin out. And in the morning, let this sheepskin, this fleece, be the only thing that's wet. Let the ground all be dry, but let this fleece be wet with dew. And in the morning he gets up and he wrings a bunch of water out of the, enough dew to fill a bowl with water is what this version says, and some says a quart or, however much, but the fleece was soaking wet. And one more thing he says, tomorrow, let the ground all be covered with dew and let the fleece be dry. And he wakes up in the morning and the fleece is dry. God has proven to be true to his call to Gideon. He has proven to Gideon that he will be with him and lead him and guide him. Gideon is assured now that God is really the one speaking to him. And that's how we end chapter 6, and that's how we end today, with seeing Gideon called to be the leader of the people of Israelite, and to bring them back to following God. And we'll continue on tomorrow. May you always know that God leads and guides us each day with love and grace and mercy.